And please join me in welcoming Heather Schneider.
All right, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, hi everyone. Like Joni said, my name is Heather. I'm the Wildlife Outreach Specialist with Project Wildlife, and today we're going to speak a little bit about wildlife rehabilitation in San Diego, the history of Project Wildlife, and what we can all do as a community to help out our native wildlife. All right, so just a brief overview of Project Wildlife. We are the main resource for sick, injured, and orphaned wildlife in Southern California. I highlight those words sick, injured, and orphaned. We are not here to take in nuisance animals that are digging in people's gardens. However, we are here to educate and help people out to learn how they can coexist or possibly deter animals from doing that. But we are here because we want to take in those wildlife that truly do need our help and need to get better to be placed back out into the wild. So right now we have two facilities. We have our body campus, which you can see that beautiful picture on Joni's background. That is our body campus. And we also have recently gained our Ramona campus as well up north. And last year we took in a combined total of 12,156 patients. And that includes patients that were brought to our doors by members of the public, humane law enforcement, and that also does include wildlife that were taken in at San Diego Humane Society's Northern, Oceanside, and Escondido campuses as well. So just a brief history of Project Wildlife. We'll go ahead and start on the bottom line. Project Wildlife was founded in 1972 by a concerned group of members of the public who were seeing sick, injured, orphaned wildlife and found that there was nowhere to take them to get help. So these volunteers gained all the proper permitting and began Project Wildlife, and initially they were rehabilitating the wildlife out of their homes. Eventually they did move into a trailer down on Sherman Street, and in 2014, Project Wildlife merged with San Diego Humane Society and became a program under them. And eventually in 2019, I believe, we moved into our brand new building down on Gaines Street, our body care center. And then up on the top line, in 1967, Fund for Animals was founded in Ramona by Cleveland Amory, who was an author as well as an animal rights activist. In 2005, Fund for Animals became a program of the Humane Society of the United States. However, in 2020, the Humane Society of the United States no longer could take on Fund for Animals, so San Diego Humane Society merged with Fund for Animals, and they became our Project Wildlife Ramona campus. So Project Wildlife's mission is to improve the quality of life for local wildlife and the community, serving as a primary resource for wild animal rehabilitation in San Diego County. So while we do want to help all of our local wildlife, help them thrive and get better, we also want to help the community. Our main goal has been and always will be peaceful coexistence between the people who live in San Diego and the wildlife that were here before us and will be here long after us as well. So Project Wildlife is permitted under California Department of Fish and Wildlife to rehabilitate all native wildlife species except for marine mammals. So due to the Marine Mammal Act, we're not even allowed to take them in. All marine mammals would need to go directly to SeaWorld for any sort of rehabilitation. However, we do have to ask ourselves, what can we successfully rehabilitate? We need to consider our resources, what enclosures we have, any sort of time constrictions that the rehabilitation process might take. And so for that reason, we will not rehabilitate shorebirds or deer. However, there is a little bit of a caveat right now with the highly pathogenic avian influenza. SeaWorld has stopped accepting shorebirds for rehabilitation. So we actually will take in shorebirds and do our best to rehabilitate them, or we'll transfer them to the International Bird Rescue up north. However, deer fawn will go to the fawn rescue up in Julian. With that being said, we're happy to take these patients in and stabilize them and then transfer them if need be, but we do always recommend to the public to take the animal directly to the care facility that they will end up at. It just reduces stress, risk of further injury, etc. So like I mentioned, we do have our two facilities. So we have our Pilar and Chuck Body Wildlife Facility at 5433 Gaines Street in San Diego. It's right across the street from the Humane Society. At this campus, we're going to be rehabilitating songbirds, corvids, gulls, raptors, small mammals such as rabbits and gophers and squirrels, and rabies vectors, so like our skunks and raccoons. However, our raptors and rabies vectors may be transferred to Ramona. There is a little bit of overlap there. It's totally dependent on spacing, staffing, and that sort of thing. So we have our Project Wildlife Ramona campus up at 18740 Highland Valley Road in Ramona. And up there, we're going to be rehabilitating the apex predators, rabies vectors, and raptors. We're one of 4 wildlife rehabilitation facilities in California licensed to rehab bears, and we're actually currently working with California Department of Fish and Wildlife to pilot a mountain lion rehabilitation program. There's not a lot of information on rehabbing that species, so we formed this partnership with them where we were like, hey, please bring us any and all mountain lions that need rehab, and we can work with you to really get a plan in place so that we can know more and do better at rehabilitating mountain lions as a whole. However, the other apex predators we take in, other than the bears and mountain lions, we also take in coyotes and bobcats up at our Ramona campus as well. So San Diego has so many animals. We are considered a biodiversity hotspot. Biodiversity is the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. And to be considered a biodiversity hotspot, there must be at least 1,500 plant species, and we must have lost at least 70% of our habitat to human development. So San Diego does check off both of those boxes, and unfortunately, San Diego also has one of the highest numbers of endangered species as well. We do have approximately 200 plant and animal species that are currently considered endangered. So just a quick species breakdown of San Diego. So San Diego has more than 500 avian species. That would include songbirds, raptors, seabirds, game birds, all sorts of birds. There's approximately 122 mammal species. That includes 91 species of land mammals and about 31 species of marine mammals that may pass through at any given time. And reptiles and amphibians, there's approximately 94 species, and that will include your turtles, snakes, lizards, frogs, and salamanders. All right, so now's a chance for you all to join in the chat and just kind of guess what our top 5 species admitted are. I don't think I have the ability to view the chat right now. Oh, I sure do. All right, so if anyone wants to type in the chat what they think our number, I think it starts with 1, but it may start with 5. But so what do you guys think our number 1 species that it gets admitted into Project Wildlife is? You can go ahead and drop it in the chat. Okay, baby birds. All right, lots of people are saying birds and raptors. All right. So we'll see if I'm right. We'll see if it starts with 1. It might start with 5. All right, so it does start with 1. So our number 1 species that we take in is actually Virginia opossums. We do get a bunch of those guys in. However, our number 2 species is house finches. We get so many house finches, especially during baby season. A lot of people will bring in those little fledglings that think that they need our help, but of course they don't. Number 3 is the desert cottontails. We get a bunch of those little guys in. Number 4 is mourning doves, and number 5 is house sparrows. So the majority of Project Wildlife's intakes does consist of avian species. We just happen to get a lot of those Virginia opossums because mom can have about 20 babies, and so usually when one needs help, they all need help. So we do get quite a few of those guys in. So I think they kind of cheated when they jumped to the front just based on their natural history. So now we're briefly going to go over what the rehabilitation process is. So like I mentioned, patients will come in through our intake doors at both campuses. So we do accept patients at our Body facility as well as our Ramona facility. Our hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Sunday. So we are there 7 days a week. Some people do wonder if we're open on Mondays because the Humane Society themselves are closed. But yes, Project Wildlife is open and we're here to take in any wildlife that may need our help. Our intake staff will then obtain information about what happened to the patient, where exactly they were found, if they were fed anything, if they were offered water. If it is a baby bird or a fledgling, we ask about if a nest was seen, if they saw mom or dad flying around, all that sort of stuff. So our intake staff do a wonderful job of asking a lot of important questions so that we can truly get the full picture and know the best way to proceed with either asking them to return the animal to the wild if it doesn't need our help, or we do admit it and help them out as well. So after our intake staff have that whole conversation, get the whole painted picture, they will transfer the patient into a secure container and immediately place them on a heat source so that they can stay warm, dark, and quiet. And next, our medical staff will examine the patient, see what's going on, see if there's illness, injury, they're just a little bit too young to be on their own. And based off that initial examination, they'll be able to administer any pain medication the patient may need, as well as begin to formulate the care plan for the patient. So after our medical team examines the patient and sees what's going on, the patient can then be transferred into their long-term housing, whether that be in the nursery if they're a baby, or critical holding if they need to get a little bit of a closer eye on them, or one of our outdoor enclosures at Body or Ramona. So from there, our animal care staff will be able to provide food and cleaning. They'll offer enrichment items, make sure the animals are getting all sorts of natural stimulation they would get similar in the wild. We want to make sure they're really nourishing and continuing to utilize those behaviors while they're in care. And our animal care staff will also administer medications prescribed by our medical team. And the medical team may recheck patients throughout care just to see how they're progressing, especially if they did have an injury. We want to make sure that they're healing and progressing well enough to make sure that they're able to thrive once released out into the wild. So another possible long-term housing plan for our patients are they might go out to one of our satellite care volunteers. So these are volunteers that work under Project Wildlife's permits, and they'll rehabilitate patients in their homes under our guidance and training and protocols. And we utilize multiple species-specific satellite teams. So that includes bats, raccoons, hummingbirds, but it's definitely not limited to those species. We also have songbirds, opossums, a corvid team. We have a team for pretty much any and all species to be rehabilitated in satellite care. And another thing our satellite volunteers will do is they will actually bring patients back to the care center for those follow-up exams that medical performs, again, just to ensure that the patients are progressing at an acceptable rate to be released back out into the wild. So after the patients go through our whole rehabilitation process, our medical team gives them one last exam, really make sure that they're going to be okay. They might do some flight testing, some live feeding to make sure they're able to get their food. And then the patient's going to be released once that final okay is given. And so our patients are released by staff or volunteers only. There's a lot that goes into releasing patients that people don't truly realize. When I initially started at Project Wildlife, I kind of had that assumption it's just opening a box and letting them go, but there's actually a lot that goes into picking the release location, making sure that the conditions are acceptable for release. And so we also do have a lot of guidelines and protocol when it comes to that as well, because we do want to set our patients up for success when they go back out into the wild. With that being said, California Department of Fish and Wildlife advises that Project Wildlife release patients within 10 miles of where they were found. Project Wildlife tries to do a little bit better, and we try to stick within 3 to 5 miles of where they were found. This is because we want them to be familiar with their surroundings. We want them to have some sort of idea of where to find food, shelter, and water. And also, if they were previously a part of a family group or a flock, we do want to give them that opportunity to return to that family group. And also, when you're returning them within a very close radius of where they were initially found, you run less of a risk of imposing any territorial issues as well. So now we're going to talk about when to intervene. A lot of wildlife are about to be seen out and about. It's about to be baby season. So either you're going to see moms with their babies, babies who are waiting for mom to return, or you're going to see adult wildlife that are out looking for a mate to reproduce. So the following symptoms should be brought to Project Wildlife immediately. There should be no hesitancy to contain the animal yourself and bring it in, or call humane law enforcement to assist you if you're uncomfortable handling wildlife, which is totally fine. So any signs of blood, broken bones, muscle exposure, ocular nasal discharge, neurologic signs, which can include like a differentiation in the size of the pupils, a head tilt, spinning, or they're non-ambulatory, they're simply not moving, or they're having issues utilizing one or multiple of their limbs. So these are all things that you should see and know that this animal definitely will need our help and should be brought to Project Wildlife if able. All right, so other than sick and injured wildlife, we also do help orphaned wildlife, but then we need to ask ourselves, are they orphaned? Do they need our help? So a bird is, we generally say a bird is orphaned if there is little to no feathering on the bird and there's absolutely no nest in sight. Rabbits can be considered orphaned if they're placed back in the nest with a marker. So that could be like twine or sticks in a crosshatch over the nest. And after 12 hours, the marker is still undisturbed. Opossums can be considered orphaned if they are smaller than 8 inches from the tip of their nose all the way to the tip of their tail. So their body isn't 8 inches, it's their body plus their tail's 8 inches. So it's definitely a little weird to see how small that actually is. But like I said, mom can have 20 of these guys on her back at once, so they need to be ready to be independent quick, because she once one falls off, she's like, you're on your own, I got 19 others, so you got this from here. And raccoons and skunks, if they are alone during the day and smaller than about 5 pounds. So these guys are a little bit more difficult to tell if they're orphaned or independent. They do tend to stay with mom a little bit longer. So I do also offer the advice of placing a laundry basket over them as well to make sure that they are orphaned. And how to intervene. So make sure you use gloves and towels. Always make sure there's a barrier between you and the wild animal, and keep the animal in a secure container with air holes. If you're concerned about smell or anything like that, some people do get concerned about like, oh, I don't want the baby to smell like a person in case the mom wants to come back, that sort of thing. So I always do just recommend, if that is a concern, you can always take any gardening gloves or gloves that you're going to use and rub them around in grass and mulch and dirt and stuff like that, and that should hide the scent of human enough, just if that makes you more comfortable. But it's truly not that big of a deal if the baby does smell like a person a little bit. I like to use the analogy of, if a child gets sprayed by a skunk, you're not just going to leave them at the park, no matter how much you might want to. And that tends to get people to understand that, like, yeah, okay, they'll just make them smell like their parents again. The main rules of rehab are to keep the animal warm, dark, and quiet. So we want to let them sit on a heating pad. I always recommend half on, half off the heating pad. This will allow the animal to regulate their own body temperature. If they feel a little bit cold, they can go to the warm side, but if they're getting a little too warm, they can go to the cool side. You also want to keep them dark, so cover them with a sheet, a towel, a pillowcase, something to just make sure there's not too much visual stimuli that can cause a lot of stress or unnecessary injury if they're trying to escape towards light. And keep it quiet. We don't want them to have too much external stimuli of people talking or checking in on them, or TVs playing or anything like that. Again, this is just to really help reduce the stress of the animal while they're waiting to be seen by our doctors. This one is a little counterintuitive. We always say, please do not offer any food or water. If an animal's injured and water is offered, there's a chance that they could fall in the water bowl and ultimately drown themselves. And so we always just say it's a little bit safer, and they'll be okay for about 24 hours without water. So no need to offer food or water. We want to make sure that they're only eating what they're supposed to. And also, again, if they do have certain types of injuries or illnesses, food and water can just exacerbate those symptoms, and it could ultimately make it worse. Again, you can always call San Diego Humane Society's humane law enforcement if you need help. They are all trained to handle and contain wildlife, and they're also trained to come out and see if the wildlife really do need to come into our care. So if there's ever a doubt, you can always give us a call and we can always help you out. And get the animal to Project Wildlife as soon as possible. So in California, there's what's called the Good Samaritan Law, where you have 48 hours to have wildlife until you get them to a licensed rehabilitator. After the 48 hours, it is illegal to have them unless you have proper permitting. But we don't want people to wait those 48 hours because that could ultimately mean the difference of success and failure when it comes to getting them back out into the wild. So definitely just get them to either our Ramona campus or our Body campus as soon as possible. And so we get a lot of people at the front at Project Wildlife saying that it's better if the wildlife are with us. They might have a cat that runs around their neighborhood or their dog. But we always just let people know that intake diversion is very important. If an animal does not need to be at Project Wildlife, it should not be at Project Wildlife. They should be in the wild. In the wild is where they're going to learn critical social skills and survival instincts from their parents and their conspecifics. So we really do want them out there because no matter how much we try to replicate the wilderness in Project Wildlife, at the end of the day, it is still a hospital. It is still a facility that we're just simply not able to 100% replicate what they would gain while being out in the wild. Also coming into a hospital setting, if they don't need to be there, they have a higher risk of contracting parasites or diseases from other patients that are there because they are sick. They have ultimately a lot more overall stress due to the amount of human interaction they need to go through while being at the facility. And they're prone to habituation or imprinting due to that consistent handling. And then ultimately that could lead them to being unable to be released or unable to be being able to be out in the wild at all. And that's just simply not a good quality of life for them at that point. So really, if an animal doesn't need to come to Project Wildlife, we do stress that with the public that it is 100% best for them to be back out in the wild where they belong. So a little bit of intake diversion for birds. For hatchlings and nestlings, if the nest is in the tree, you can still see it. It's okay to place them back in the nest. However, if the nest is no longer in the tree, it got blown out, or you accidentally cut it off when you were trimming your trees, anything like that, even though we definitely recommend waiting until fall to do that. Please don't do that during baby season. It's okay to use a small box or a strawberry basket to create a makeshift nest and then place it in the tree. For fledglings, we recommend placing the fledgling back where it was found or in a safe surrounding area. So we don't want to say, oh, if you found a fledgling in the middle of the street, don't put it back in the middle of the street. It's okay to move it a little bit over into a more wooded or into a bush or anything like that. Mom and dad will be back to take care of the baby and keep it safe. And if pets are a concern, we definitely just advise people to keep cats indoors and dogs on a leash, or just, kind of try to talk to your neighbors and let people know, hey, there's a fledgling here, give them a week or two, they'll be gone. Just please make sure your pets aren't going in that general area. So I do love this picture. This just kind of shows the life stages of a mourning dove, all the way from that little nestling phase up to being a fledgling. So I love to show this to people to just kind of point out, like, this is when you would put it back in the tree versus this is when you would leave it on the ground and let them do their whole fledgling thing. All right, so some intake diversion for mammals. Again, like I previously stated with opossums, if they're 8 inches or longer, they're okay to be on their own, place them back to where they were found, or find a safer nearby location, and they should be able to go right on their merry little way. For opossums, I do always also recommend, if you did find one in the middle of the day, try to wait until a little bit closer to evening to release them, just because they are a nocturnal species. For desert cottontails and squirrels, go ahead and place them back in the nest that you found with flour or a circle of sticks or anything over it. If mom returns, the nest will be disturbed. So with species like cottontails and squirrels, they tend to only spend about 20 minutes a day with their babies. Otherwise, they are out feeding themselves and avoiding being near the nest because they don't want to attract predators. So for cottontails, they're gonna go back to their nests for 10 minutes in the morning to feed the babies and then 10 minutes in the evening to feed the babies. But other than that, they're nowhere near the nest because again, they don't want to attract any predators that could be nearby. And for raccoons and skunks, place a laundry basket over them. Don't weigh the laundry basket down, just go ahead and place the laundry basket right over the baby and then give it about overnight and see if mom returns, because if mom does return, she will actually lift up that laundry basket, let her baby out, and they'll be on their merry way. Versus if you wait overnight and the baby's still under the laundry basket, it's absolutely okay to assume that that animal is orphaned, mom did not come back. And this is just a brief slide about why coexistence is so important. Each animal in San Diego has a job, and it's up to us to allow them to do that job. They're doing their job to keep San Diego's ecosystem so beautiful. And like I said, San Diego is one of the most biodiverse cities in the world, and we want to make sure it stays that way. We want to protect our wildlife. And as we encroach on their territory, they are adapting to us. So we need to adapt to them as well. They're not going anywhere, and so it's just very important that we learn to be friendly neighbors to our wildlife and educate all of our friends to do the same thing, because life is just so much easier when you're peacefully coexisting with wildlife and letting them do their thing to make everything just so much beautiful and so much better in San Diego. All right, so with that being said, here are a few wildlife don'ts that I like to educate on. The first one, and the one that is most frustrating to me, is definitely glue traps. This is actually a photo that I took myself when I was working in admissions on the domestic side of things. So these traps are extremely inhumane. Most animals that are trapped on glue traps either die of dehydration or starvation, and they will actually break their bones attempting to escape from these glue traps. And the other issue with them is they trap a lot of animals that are not the intended target. So as we can see here, this is a rattlesnake that's stuck on a glue trap, but I've seen glue traps with birds stuck to them. We had one a few weeks ago that had a great horned owl stuck to it, and rabbits and squirrels and all sorts of other small animals can get stuck to them. And there's just a lot more humane ways to deal with any rodents or anything that may be in your home. So another big no-no that we try to educate on is rodenticide. So rodenticide is the rat poison, or there's even like pesticides that people will put on their plants that can be bad. And so what happens is if a rodent ingests rodenticide, they don't immediately drop dead in wherever they were. They will run out, go back out into the wild, and then an owl comes down and eats it, and now that owl or that hawk or that coyote are now poisoned by the rodenticide that the rodent then ingested. And there's actually been studies recently that the majority of raptors that get any sort of testing after being found dead have some trace amounts of rodenticide in their system. So this is a huge issue, and so we do truly try to educate on not using rodenticides, because you're not only hurting rodents, they definitely hurt a lot of other animals higher up in the food chain as well. The next one is trapping and relocating. A lot of people see this as a solution for any sort of coyote problems or raccoons or opossums. The first thing I do tell people is that this is illegal. Trapping and relocating in the state of California is illegal. If an animal is trapped, that animal will either then need to be released immediately where it was found. So that means literally opening the trap door and letting them right back out, or they do need to be euthanized, and that is California state law. So it's just ultimately better to not trap them at all. And ultimately, it won't remove any unwanted wildlife. So if you trap, theoretically, if you trap one coyote, move it away and release it elsewhere, another coyote is just going to move into that vacancy that you just created. So really, hazing is the best option for these sort of things, where you're just gently encouraging the animal to move along and not want to be in your area. It's kind of like being an annoying neighbor, so you make the wildlife want to move away. So you be really loud and shoo them away and use lots of lights and water and all sorts of things, and it will hopefully get the animal to want to move along on their own volition. But yes, definitely trapping and relocating is not a good option for this.
We have a question about the glue traps. Is,
Yeah,
is there ever a reason to legitimately use them?
I cannot think of a reason to ever legitimately use a glue trap, because I feel like there's always other more humane options, especially because most people use glue traps to try to trap rodents. And so there's actually a lot more humane traps that work better than glue traps to be able to trap rodents so that they cannot be in your home anymore. And then you release them outside a little bit further away from your home.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, was there any other questions right now?
No, we're good. I put contact information in the chat for the Project Wildlife website, which has a lot of really great information, their address on Gain Street and their phone number.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone ever has questions that pop up, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to answer any questions anyone may have as they come up as well. Okay, excuse me. All right, so now we're going to go over a few wildlife do's. So one of my favorite is preventing window strikes by hanging these really awesome UV stickers on windows. They're pretty incognito when people are looking at them, but the birds see them really well. They reflect UV that birds see naturally. So this kind of lets them know like, oh, don't want to fly over there. There's something blocking my way. I actually have them hanging on my office window because unfortunately, when I first moved into this office, there was nothing on the windows and a hummingbird ran directly into my window when I was sitting here. And so I was like, absolutely not. I'm hanging up these stickers. I hung them up the same day, and since then I have not had any window strikes, and they also just look really cool, if I'm being honest. I have little hummingbird ones hanging on my window right now. I also recommend placing bird feeders at least 30 feet away from any buildings or windows. Um, I know a lot of people like to hang them or place them right outside of windows so that you can watch the birds eat. But when the birds are eating, they're just more at risk of running into the window, especially if they're flying up to a bird feeder or trying to get away if another bird flies up to the bird feeder. So it's definitely just a little bit safer for them to place bird feeders as far away from buildings or windows as possible. I also always like to encourage planting native plants in your garden. This will attract natural pollinators. And if you're like me and you can't keep a plant alive, it's also just helpful for you because it doesn't take as much work to keep them alive because they're naturally supposed to be planted here. But they're overall just a really great option. They look beautiful, they smell beautiful, and they attract all sorts of great pollinators that will then continue to spread the wildflowers and the pollen throughout the county. And it's just a great option at helping out our wildlife while making things look a lot prettier too. And using humane trapping and exclusion methods. So as you can see here, we have these little mouse traps that I actually have a lot of experience with. I did have a mouse in my office for a while, and so I was actually able to use one of these traps, and I trapped him, and he just kind of hung out in there until we were able to get him checked out at body, make sure he looked okay. And then we just took him far away from the building, just into a little bit of a more wooded area nearby, and we let him go. And so that's great, and it's a wonderful option to just, it's humane, the animal doesn't have to get hurt, and you know, they get out as well. There's also,
oh, sorry, I have a couple questions.
yeah.
One is regarding the humane trapping methods. If we're not allowed to relocate them, then what do we do after we trap them?
So I don't think it's considered relocating to just get them out of your home to a more natural area. So I'm not saying to trap one in Escondido and then release it in Oceanside. It's more so just getting them out of your home and releasing them back into nature. It's very important if you are going to be using these methods to make sure that they don't have a way to get back into your home. So finding an entry point and kind of knowing how they're getting in initially is a good way to go about that. So I'm definitely not encouraging any sort of widespread relocation. It's more of a relocation of taking them from inside of your home and placing them in a more natural area that they should be in.
Okay. And then another question is, what animals are rabies vectors?
Okay, yeah. So rabies vectors in San Diego County include raccoons, bats, skunks, bobcats, and coyotes. Oh, and foxes.
And then another question is, if we find an injured animal when Project Wildlife is closed, what do we do?
So if you find injured wildlife while Project Wildlife is closed, you can keep them overnight, just keep them warm, dark, and quiet, and then you can bring them to us during business hours. However, if you are uncomfortable doing that, you can also always call our humane law enforcement and they'll be able to retrieve them from you. Depending on the severity of the case of the animal or what type of animal it is, they may also advise that you keep it overnight, but humane law enforcement is always available to help out as well.
And they're at that same phone number, the 619-299-701.
Yes, so to contact humane law enforcement, it's the 619-299-7012, and then when prompted to press an extension, you can just press 1 and it'll take you straight to our dispatchers.
Okay. Another question on that cute little mouse trap. What do you know what brand that is?
I don't know the brand exactly, but if you Google humane mouse traps, they show up pretty often. I can also, Joni, if you wanted to spread the word on this, I can also send you a link to the ones that I personally used in my office. I'm wondering if it's still in here so I could show it as an example, but I think we were able to trap that little guy and get him out. So then I ended up putting it back in the care center.
Okay. And then you mentioned rabbit fencing. Do you have an example of what that would look like?
So I don't have an example of what it would look like, but it is sold at most hardware stores, and it just kind of makes it a little bit more difficult for rabbits to dig into gardens and that sort of thing. Again, more than happy to find a few examples of those and send those your way so that you can share that with everyone else.
Okay, great. We're caught up for now.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds good. Keep the questions coming. And another big one is one-way exit. So a lot of people have bats in their attics or raccoons or opossums that like to go under their porches in their attics, that sort of thing. And so there are one-way exits that can be installed so that you put it at the entry point where the animal is going in. And once they leave to go out and get food, they're no longer able to re-enter. So that does give you a little bit of time to close up that entry point and make sure that the animal can't come back in. So that's always a great option as well. And San Diego also has a few companies that do humane wildlife exclusion, removal, that sort of thing. So the ones off the top of my head, his name is Chris Jones, and he does a really great job of humanely removing wildlife from where they may be causing some issues, bats in attics, raccoons and skunks under porches, that sort of thing. So that's another great option as well. Okay, so here's a little bit of advice on how to deter wildlife. The big one is removing any attractants. So food, water, shelter, these are what's going to definitely make a wild animal consider your home for a temporary hideout. So make sure to secure trash and clean up any fallen fruits and vegetables. A lot of wildlife will see this as an all-you-can-eat buffet, especially opossums and raccoons. Opossums are nature's garbage men. They will eat anything and they love, love, love fallen fruits and veggies. So if you don't want any of those guys in your yard, just make sure to pick those up in a timely fashion as to not attract any wildlife. If you have pets, make sure you feed them indoors or at specific times. So I never recommend leaving out a bowl of cat food. If you do have outdoor cats or community cats in your area that you like to feed, I always just recommend kind of feeding them at set times. So you know from 6 to 7 p.m. my cats have that much time to eat food. After that, the food's coming inside because the cats will learn that, and that way it's not just a free-for-all for any wildlife that might want to indulge as well. And avoid offering access to water sources. So pools are a water source, bird baths, ponds, those sort of things can all be water sources. I know some of these things is kind of difficult to avoid, like a pool. You can't really stop a pool, but just know that these are considered wildlife attractants. And then a few deterrents you can utilize to try to keep wildlife out of your yard are ammonia-soaked rags. It has a really strong smell. They're not going to want to go near it. Motion sensor lights. Wildlife see us as predators. So any sort of lights turning on or loud noises generally kind of startle them off. For any sort of digging that may be occurring, I always recommend cayenne sprinkled in gardens. This will definitely keep the digging wildlife away, or the ones that are trying to eat plants. Another thing you can do is plant bitter tasting plants. I believe marigold is one that rabbits really don't like because it tastes very bitter. And another one I like to offer people who have cats or dogs at home is you can actually kind of line your yard with your cat or dog's urine or feces, and this will actually keep wildlife away because they'll smell that, they'll sense that, and they will see that as being a predator's territory, and they'll try to avoid that area as well. All right, so how you can help. We are always accepting donations. San Diego Humane Society as a whole is a nonprofit, so I always tell people we thrive and survive off of our volunteers and donations. So Project Wildlife is always accepting donations of towels, blankets, and newspapers. These are items we go through very quickly when it comes to caring for our patients. You can volunteer if you're interested. We have satellite volunteers, care center volunteers, intake and outreach volunteers. And we'll go over those roles a little bit more in a moment, just in case you are interested, get a little bit of an idea of what each role does. And the next thing you can do is spread the word. As much as we try to get out there and educate, I always ask people I present to spread the word and educate your friends, family, and your neighbors on how to peacefully coexist with wildlife, and educate them that Project Wildlife is a thing that is a resource for them as well. Like I said, we're always here to answer questions. We want to help wildlife as much as possible, and to help the wildlife, we love to help the people as well, because we want it to be a peaceful coexistence on both ends. All right, so volunteering at Project Wildlife might be right for you if you are at least 18 years old, you love local wildlife, you enjoy a fast-paced and dynamic work environment, you enjoy learning new things every single day, you don't mind getting a little dirty. It's not always the cleanest, prettiest job, but it is really fun. And you want to make a difference in your community. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to schools and I've educated children, and I've just kind of seen their opinions on certain animals change completely. One of my favorite animals is the striped skunk, and so being able to teach kiddos about their little defense dances that they do before they spray, and that they don't want to spray you, and all that stuff is just really, really rewarding. And, I just think everyone needs to love skunks a little bit more, which goes back to you don't mind getting a little dirty, because I have been sprayed in the face by a skunk and I still love them with my whole heart. All right, so like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have our satellite volunteers. These volunteers care for and rehabilitate wildlife in their homes until they are healthy enough for release. There are specific teams for most species. I don't have a whole list of all the species we do, but I'm pretty much sure you can name a species and we have a satellite team for that species, unless it's like a bobcat, a coyote, or a bear. So our satellite volunteers are being actively recruited externally. So we are pretty much always looking for satellite volunteers, whereas most other roles go through recruitment periods. So we might not always be looking for a care center volunteer, but you can pretty much always consider satellite volunteering if you're interested. And our satellite volunteers are recruited and supported by our satellite supervisor, Erin. She's amazing. She's the best. And she's more than happy to answer any questions about satellite volunteering that anyone may have. So next we have our care center volunteers. This is the entry-level volunteer role at Project Wildlife. Excuse me. And this role just kind of will help you learn the basics of wildlife rehab, including diet prep, restocking supplies, cleaning and sanitizing, whether that be work areas or enclosures or things that had been in enclosures, and setting up animal care areas and enclosures for patients that may be incoming. So this care center volunteer role has step-up opportunities into our intake role, and then after that, our outreach role. And we do have care center volunteer roles available at both Body and Ramona. So next we have our intake volunteers. Again, this is considered a step-up role from care center. And again, this is not actively recruited. So we go through recruitment processes where usually I feel like it's about once or twice a year, we'll kind of go, okay, we're ready to recruit more volunteers for the intake role. And so these volunteers will assist with our intake staff with greeting guests, getting the information that I mentioned. So getting all the questions answered of where the animal was found, what did it eat, was mom or dad nearby, was it hit by a car, what did you see, all that sort of thing. And they will then intake and transfer the injured wildlife. They'll be responsible for updating and filing wormed records, helping out the staff with that, as well as educating the public. So at the intake door, we do a lot of education of, hey, this is a fledgling, it doesn't actually need to be here. Are you willing to take it back? So our intake volunteers and intake staff do have a lot of conversations with the public that result in hopefully the public learning a little bit more about Project Wildlife and what we do. And this intake role is actually the stepping stone into our outreach volunteer program. So the outreach volunteers are the volunteers that I work with. They will educate the public on coexisting with San Diego's native wildlife. Sorry. And they'll do this by attending and presenting at events that can include info booths, school programs, speaking engagements, as well as philanthropy events. So San Diego Humane Society will do a lot of philanthropy events with their donors, and so our outreach volunteers will present at these as well. We do have multiple tiers for presenting. So we start our staff at info booths. They're very informal, very easy, fun, pretty simple. The public will come up and ask questions, and then we'll work our way up to those philanthropy events. And eventually, these volunteers will be able to assist with training. I am so sorry. Assist with training and handling of the ambassador animals.
I'll give you a break for a second, Heather, and I'll go over some things in the chat. Someone had asked about what if we find a rattlesnake in our yard, what do we do? And I was able to answer that. We have a local guy named Bruce Ireland, and I listed his phone number there. He really loves snakes, and he will not hurt them. He will capture them and release them outside of your property in a wild space. He's pretty well known, I know, around my neighborhood in Carlsbad. We seem to get a lot of snakes, when it starts heating up. So he's a good phone number to have in case you ever need it. And then I also put a link in there for the Project Wildlife baby shower. And what that is it's a way for Project Wildlife to obtain resources from the public, and that could include any of you if you're interested. There's a lot of items that they have on their wish list that are in getting ready for baby season, things like different types of food and equipment, and I don't know, something like food bowls or you name it, and it's in there. And there's various ways to purchase those items, for example, through Amazon, and then they will receive those items directly. So I put the link for that in case you're interested in supporting them. They really appreciate every little bit that folks can provide to them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I apologize, you all. I am recovering from a bug. And another thing with the rattlesnakes is our humane law enforcement staff are also totally trained to handle rattlesnakes and re-release them into, again, like with the rodents, just areas that are nearby, but a little bit better for them, keeping the public safe. So you can also always call our humane law enforcement to help out with rattlesnakes as well. And to answer the question in the chat about the shorebird facility, if you're talking about the International Bird Rescue, I believe that it is up in Orange County. So it is quite a little bit a ways away. But yes, that is who we're kind of working with to rehabilitate the shorebirds during the highly pathogenic avian influenza. Okay, so again, I apologize for that little coughing fit that I just had. But now we can talk about how to volunteer. So to become a volunteer, you will apply online to become a foundation volunteer. So this will just kind of provide some information on the organization as a whole, the culture of the organization, and all sorts of volunteer opportunities that are available, whether that be at Project Wildlife or on the domestic side as well. And then all of our volunteers will then go through completing the volunteer application for the specific role you would like to be a part of, attending a virtual meet and greet with our volunteer team, as well as the staff partner for that particular role, signing up for an on-site group interview. This is just our chance to kind of show you a little bit more about what the role will be doing. And then there are 5 foundation level trainings and e-learnings that need to be completed. And then after that, each specific role might have a little bit more, a little bit less for you to work on. But overall, that's kind of generally how becoming a volunteer works. And if there's ever any questions on that, I'd be happy to put you in contact with our volunteer manager as well. She's amazing. She'll be able to answer any and all questions that anyone may have about volunteering. But other than that, does anyone have any other questions about Project Wildlife or wildlife in general? I am happy to answer any questions.
Maybe you want to unshare your screen and we'll get everybody back.
Yeah,
There we
sounds
go.
good. All right. I'm not still sharing, correct?
Right.
Okay, perfect.
I don't see any other questions in the chat, but if anyone has anything else, you can put them in the chat or feel free to speak up and ask a question.
I have a question about like raptors. If we have one that's injured or ill, what do we do? Because this happened to us last year. We had a pair of babies, and one of them was so dehydrated that Mike just walked up and put a blanket over him, and we couldn't get anybody. I mean, nobody was there, and we got somebody on the phone, and they said take it to a vet in Encinitas, and the vet euthanized it. So
per the instructions from Project Wildlife and the Humane Society.
So we don't want to go through that again, and we have a lot of birds out here. So what do we do if that we come across another one like that?
Yeah, so if you do come across wildlife that do need your help, if you're comfortable containing them, please do feel free to contain them and then bring them to either Body or Ramona at your earliest convenience. Our hours are the 9 to 5, Monday through Sunday. But sometimes, depending on the hours or the severity of the cases, we do work closely with a lot of vet hospitals that we will then speak with them to see what's going on. And sometimes euthanasia is advised if the animal is suffering and does not have a positive viable outcome. So unfortunately, that does happen sometimes in wildlife rehabilitation. It's just kind of comes with the field. But usually if you do call our humane law enforcement dispatch, they will be able to send out an officer as long as you're within our jurisdiction to pick the wildlife up. However, if you're not within our jurisdiction, you can always call the animal control facility that would manage your area. So I don't know where that is, but I would again be happy to send a list to Joni to share with everyone of those jurisdictions as well.
Thank you.
I wanted to maybe, Heather, have you elaborate a bit more about baby birds and when to intervene. And I know you did touch on that, but I know we get a lot of calls at the nature center where people see a fledgling, doing what it does, which is maybe not quite flying yet, but maybe hopping around on the ground and looking a little uncoordinated. And the initial reaction is to rescue it when it turns out that it's not orphaned and it's not injured and mom is around. But if you blink real quick, you might miss mom coming back to feed it. So maybe elaborate a bit more on, when you should really leave it alone versus when you should rescue it.
Yeah, so Fledglings in general, I say unless there's obvious signs of injury, so maybe like a wing droop or any signs of blood, bone, muscle exposure, anything like that, or if it was caught by a cat, that sort of thing, or a dog, then they should definitely come into Project Wildlife. However, if they are seemingly healthy, just kind of doing their little hopping around awkward thing, mom and dad are around, I do always just educate to kind of place them in a little bit of a safer area if they're kind of getting themselves into some trouble, kind of taking them off the sidewalk, that sort of thing, so that they can continue to be out in the wild. Always, you can keep an eye on them, but other than that, I feel that with baby birds, the best time to intervene is when they're more like they're younger, they're in that nestling hatchling phase, and if there's no nest in sight that they can be placed back into, or you're unable to create a man-made nest and place them into a tree. So those little guys should come to Project Wildlife. They're not old enough to be on their own, or if a hummingbird is ever on the ground. So hummingbirds do not fledge from the ground, they will fledge from the nest. So I do also just recommend if you ever find a hummingbird on the ground and there's no nest to put them back into, they should come to Project Wildlife as well. It's a little bit of a difficult thing with baby birds because there are so many situations in the ifs, ands, buts, but general rule of thumb, fledglings are good to be on the ground as long as they are healthy, and nestlings and nestlings and hatchlings can be placed back into a nest or in a man-made nest. But the other caveat with the nestlings and hatchlings is if there is another nest that's really high up and you can't reach and you can hear a baby in that nest, mom will not go to 2 different nests. So at that point in time, if you can't place the baby back in the nest with the other baby, it should come to Project Wildlife because mom will not take care of one or the other.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I recommend to people is if there is a baby just doing its thing, it's not hurt, and the parents are around, probably the best thing you can do to help it is, besides leaving it alone, is make sure you're keeping your dog or cat away from it.
Yes, I always recommend people, if they know a fledgling's out there, don't let your cat outside, keep your dog on a leash. If your cat absolutely has to go outside, which make sure they have a bell and that sort of thing. But I can't tell you how many times people have brought us a fledgling. They're like, oh my gosh, like a bird was trying to attack it while I was like picking it up. And I was like, I promise you that was mom telling you to drop her baby. And they just are always like, oh my God, really? Like they take care of them that much? And I'm like, absolutely they do.
Any other questions?
I have one more quick question. When you talk about the man-made nests, for years I saved every single strawberry basket I ever got and turned them in to Project Wildlife. Do you still want them?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Absolutely. We use those all the time for our little hatchlings, our hummingbirds, all that stuff. So those are very helpful at Project Wildlife. We'll definitely take them.
Okay, so can I drop them off at like one of the outlying campuses like Escondido or Oceanside or?
So you can definitely drop them off at Escondido or Oceanside because they will take in wildlife as well, and they'll actually be able to use them at those campuses.
Okay, but so they don't get to you if it's the San Diego Humane Society?
It could get to us. I was just saying that they might be able to use it there as well when they take in wildlife for us that need to be transferred down to us, because they will accept wildlife at Escondido and Oceanside as well to await transport to be brought to our campus.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, I think that looks like we covered everything. I am recording this, so I will be sending out the link, and we will include some of these references as well. And I just wanted to thank you, Heather, for joining us tonight. It was really informative and hopefully will help reduce the number of patients you get.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for letting me present to you all. It was awesome.
Great. All right.
I'm sorry, I have a last minute question,
Sure.
but you're trying to close up here. You mentioned you gave the name of one one person that off the top of your head who could do humane wildlife removal or exclusion? Do you have the names of any other companies or individuals
So
just to
there,
have as a resource?
yeah, there were a few that we were kind of looking into. There was a situation where we had to kind of put our heads together to see if we could figure one out. I don't know those off the top of my head, and I don't have any personal experience with any of the other ones. But I can kind of put a little list together and get it to Joni for her to share with everyone. But the one off the top of my head was Chris Jones. He's the main one that we recommend to people when we when we get any sort of concerns about wildlife in people's attics or anything like that.
As happens. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay, anybody else? We're good?
Hmm.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again next time.
Right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Right.
Have a great
Thank you.
night.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you,
Thank
Joni.
you.
Mhm.